At 14, I tried to smoke grass. It's not what you think. It did not go well. Hello, dear listener, and welcome to Honestly, Dear Listener, the show where we talk about creativity, mindset, and the weird, holy mess of being a human. Today, we're doing something a little different. I'm sharing a finished thing. I'll be reading one of my recent short stories called The Inside Girl. It's about growing up in a bubble, longing to be inside of culture, but being stuck on the outside, and the day teenage curiosity met cattail fluff and fire. It's a story I needed to write to make sense of my longing to belong. We're two childhood best friends talking about creative mindset.
I'm Emily Hatch.
And I'm Carrie Schaeffer, and this is Honestly, Dear Listener.
Honestly, dear listener.
Woo! So, every once in a while, we like to drop an episode that's a finished piece, an essay, a song, a story, because part of our mission is to not just talk about doing the work, but also sharing it. And a note, if you prefer reading this story instead, a link to the full text is in the show notes. All right, settle in. Here's the Inside Girl. I grew up in a bubble. In my world, rubbers were galoshes, reefer was a jolly abbreviation for the fridge, and babies were made by rolling around on glass tables at hospitals. I'd only ever known the smooth and continuous curve of the inside of the bubble, its completeness. When I left it, however, I found that my social and cultural understanding were riddled with holes. Even now, just when I start to feel like I'm really part of something, I find more. For example, well into adulthood, I thought I discovered this great new band named Chicago. A few years ago, I felt the shape of my own body and realized with elation and grief that it was for me. I suspect there are things you can only learn in your childhood, frameworks and scaffolds that can only take root before a certain age. And if you miss it, you miss it. You do the best you can to keep going with what you have, patching, filling, mending, but always with a sense that you've missed something or replaced it, and that something might be you. With much fear and trembling, my mother dropped me off on my first day ever of public school, midway through my freshman year of high school. Walking into the building, I felt like the white frill on little girls' Easter socks, conspicuous, afraid sin would get on me and render me obsolete. It was as depraved as they said it was going to be. I smelled cigarette smoke when a boy sat down next to me in class. One punk girl with spiky orange hair was listening to angry music on her headphones as she wrote on her skin and nails with neon gel pens. I counted 42 F words that day. I was taught that as a representative of Jesus, I would be different, and that difference was confirmation that I was doing something right, that I was in the world, but not of it. But I found I couldn't function in a world where I could neither speak nor understand the language. I didn't know what eating out meant or what the boys were trying to prove when they dared me to touch my elbows together behind my back. I didn't know what the thriller dance was or how to use a tampon or that thongs weren't footwear. I tried to take pride in my ignorance, but I ended up feeling like a weirdo. Not like a cute weirdo who wears glasses with no prescription and insists that she's just such a nerd. The bad kind, who trips over her own name as she's introducing herself because she's obsessively thinking about how much space her tongue takes up in her mouth, causing little flecks of spittle to fly out and land on the other person's arm. Being set apart for God was starting to lose its luster. Not only did I not feel of the world, I barely felt in it. One day in the hall, I overheard two guys talking about smoking grass. I was confused on the grass part, but I knew what smoking was. It was bad, not only for your body, but more importantly for your soul. I knew Christians who smoked, but they were rare, usually the backslidden husband of a godly wife who kept dragging him to church every Sunday. In my subculture, smoking was out, a signifier that you'd rather light a coffin nail on fire than be on fire for the Lord. But the guys in the hall made it sound sort of cool. My mind flipped to the pages of the perfumed magazines I'd poured through at the dentist's office, to the super slim cigarette ads, to the giraffe woman with shoulder pads, swathed in long, shiny hair, frozen, laughing, mid-stride in a city crosswalk with a cigarette lightly held between two glossy red polished fingertips. You caught me, on my smoke break, after charming a room full of rich men and on my way to pick up the keys to the city. She was the inside girl. She didn't accidentally spit on people. She was in on the joke. Underneath what I was supposed to want, I longed to be the inside girl, to stride down the halls of the school, laughing at everything and everyone, utterly fluent, not only the teller of the joke, but its writer. I longed to feel how cool it would be to close my soft lip pillows around that slim white cylinder as the cigarette released its magic drugs into my tall, willowy body. I'd breathe in all that rebellious cotton candy smoke, turn my face to heaven, form my lips into a red, moistened O, and blow in the face of God one languid lungful of sweet, white smoke. Then I'd turn to whomever I was ignoring and say, with gorgeous boredom, "Now, what were you saying?" From the murkiness of the 1980s, a memory swam to mind of Disney's 1938 cartoon short, Brave Little Tailor, when the giant rolls up a haystack in a tarp, lights it with a pot-bellied stove, and smokes it. So, for the giant, a smoke consisted of two ingredients, the hay and a tarp, which translated to me, it was a cigarette, was tobacco and paper. Which part was the bad part? Must have been the tobacco. How could paper be bad? Anyway, tobacco was lost to me. Getting it felt about as accessible as picking my own in Cuba. But the guys had specifically said grass, and I knew where to find that. A plan was starting to take shape, solving two problems at once. First, to satisfy the curiosity of what this smoking thing was all about, and second, and just as important, to scrape together some mound of authority about something societal and to stand on it. I wouldn't eat the forbidden fruit. I'd just lick at it a little, wet my mouth with its juice, hide the pulp in my pockets, and proclaim from on high to the curious peasants at my feet, I won't affirm or deny, but smoking's not all it's cracked up to be, while secretly knowing it was. Having transformed myself into the inside girl and earning credibility with my classmates, I would reverse course and turn my back on smoking forever, having avoided developing the habit through strength of my willpower. I would return godly and blameless, having never actually set a toe over the line, just rubbing up against it a little. After all, it was grass, not tobacco. Then, after an appropriate amount of time passed, I would confess what I'd done to a room full of my Christian peers, declaring how Jesus had freed me from a dirty and degrading life of smoking. I would leave the grass part out. The public confession would shock them and secure their admiration in my resolve of living a pure and godly life, while I installed the smoking ordeal as the glittering centerpiece in the crown of my personal testimony. None would be wise, but myself. After school, I dug around in the old coffee can we kept junk in on the kitchen counter. I produced a disposable lighter which I quickly shoved in my pocket. Next, I went out to the backyard, plucked a few blades of lawn, and hurried to the wooded area behind our row of houses. The afternoon light slanted through the trees, and the sticks snapped as I tried to walk casually through the dried brush. February was chilly in the high desert of western Colorado, and I'd wished I'd brought a coat. My excitement for debauchery had overshadowed all non-smoking related concerns. I didn't want to go back home and risk being detained, so I carried on with just my long-sleeve shirt. Entering my favorite little clearing, I noticed the pile of fluff spread out between the naked Russian olive trees. The weekend before, a girl from school and I had cleared out the west side of the ditch of bulrushes to make a fairy bed of cattail down. At the time, I had marveled how one slender seed head produced handful after handful of glorious fluff. We'd rolled around in it a few times, leaving it for the fairies to enjoy. A week later, it had lost a little of its volume, but overall, it was still fairly fluffy. I knelt next to it and arranged my gathered materials with the precision of a surgeon. These things couldn't be rushed. Gingerly, I sprinkled the grass bits into a piece of yellow paper I had scrounged out of the art supply drawer. I blew on the bits a little to dry off the sheen of my hand sweat. Next was the rolling, but I quickly figured I needed to cut down the paper if I wanted to produce a cigarette that was just the right length. After ripping the paper as best I could and rolling the blades up in it, I remembered the giant had licked the paper to make it stick. But no amount of my saliva could keep the cigarette from unrolling. Finally, with one hand, I ripped the hair tie out of my hair and looped the elastic around the cigarette to hold it together. My long blonde hair fell around my face and down my back. I flipped it behind me and turned my attention to the lighter. It was the kind with a child's safety latch you had to slide sideways with a click before it would depress the red button. And to my extreme annoyance, you had to click it before every single flick. Click, flick, click, flick, click, flick. To further complicate the situation, the lighter was nearly empty of fluid, and after click flicking about 27 times, it finally produced a weak flame. I turned my back to the wind and quickly cupped my hands around it. The light danced in the cave of my hand. This was it. I stood in the door frame of adulthood, the portal that would burn away the weirdo while I emerged the inside girl, golden and laughing. You caught me, on my smoke break. I held the flame to the end of the paper, my hands shaking. My lips closed around the other end, and I waited for the magic to happen. Instead of smoldering, the flame crept along the end of the paper tube toward my elastic hair tie before the wind blew it out. Had I done it wrong? It was supposed to smolder, not burn, right? Maybe instead of assuming the cigarette knew what to do, I had to help it. After another verse of click flicks, I once again lit the cigarette, and this time, while the wind blew out the flame on one end, I sucked in on the other. It felt like trying to suck in air from a hallway, and I realized that when I looked in one side of the tube, I could see sunlight on the other side. Did the grass need to be more compact in there? Was I supposed to have put more in? I'd used up all the grass I'd plucked. I looked around for lawn, but I was surrounded by weeds. Would those work? No, Carrie, I said out loud, frustrated. Who ever heard of smoking weed? This wasn't working. I looked at the half-burnt paper tube in my hand. I looked at myself. A stubby freshman with braces and bitten fingernails, wearing clothes her grandmother bought her from Kmart. Pretending but knowing she really didn't have the faintest clue. I wasn't the inside girl. I was an outside loser. As I sat in my self-pity, I flicked the lighter with one hand, punctuating my shame with rhythmic staccato clicks. Click, flick. If the kids at school saw me, I would have never heard the end of it. Ooh, you're a real bad kid now, I imagine them saying. Click, flick. So cool, smoking your construction paper cigarette. Click, flick. I felt tired, heavy laden with shame. I picked up a ball of cattail fluff at my feet. It hardly made a dent in the pile. I opened my hand to the wind. It took my offering and carried the seeds west to the sun. Click, flick. I released another handful and another, the sting, or rather the memory of the sting, blowing away with each release. The fading afternoon light streaked through the fluffy down at my feet. Click, flick. Like clouds on the ground instead of in the sky, I thought. Click, flick. Like cotton candy. Click, flick. Click, flick. I noticed a small flame dancing at the end of a lighter. My thoughts danced with it, danced on the wind floating west. The flame moved in the direction I would have chosen, to meet the edge of the clouds on the ground. My thoughts were nothing at all. A flash. My eyes were full of light. My nerves snapped awake. I watched, my teeth pulsing, my limbs frozen as the cattail fairy bed exploded with flame, the whoosh of it sucking the air from my lungs like a vacuum. Before I could piece any sense together, all fluff had disappeared as if it had never been, replaced with clumps of burning weeds. Out of reflex, I watched my hands shoot out in front of me and bat at one clump of flames. When batting didn't work, I tried stomping them. The fire licked at the tall, dry grass, moving faster than I could. A memory slammed into my brain of people in movies using wet sacks to beat out a fire. I didn't have water or sacks, but I had clothes. I squirmed out of my shirt, held it by the two arms, and beat the flames with the torso. But the fire spread faster, bellowed by every beat. The flames that had started in the weeds were finding their way to the dry Russian olive trees. I was surrounded by fire, and something very old and knowing inside me said simply, "This situation is beyond you." So I did the only thing I could do. I took off for home. Anyone living in the row of houses next to mine could have looked out their back window and seen this. A blur of a child with no shirt, but wearing a very grandmotherly brassiere, paired with a strange brown collar of fur around her neck, tearing through a field of weeds with a face full of ash, tears, and terror. My parents heard the screaming and ran to the backyard to find me in hysterics, pointing to a column of gray smoke rising above the trees. The rest of the story I've pieced together from secondhand accounts, fragments of overheard conversation, and a collection of tiny films stuck in my mind. The reassembling of it has become canonized into our family lore. The story is as follows. After I was sure my parents had caught the meaning of my animal flailings and groanings, I ran into the house, utterly non-functional. A wailing, snotting, hand-wringing, sooty, stinking, sodden mess. I blurred and slammed my way to the upstairs hall bathroom, the center of the house, the only room without a window. The so-called inside girl locked herself in the most inside room in the house. The strange brown fur collar I was wearing was 9 inches of my long blonde hair burnt into a bird's nest around my neck. All I could do was stand in front of the bathroom mirror and weep as I pulled out the broken, burnt wads and piled them up in the sink. My mother said later that when she'd first laid eyes on me in the yard, my hair looked like glass. Meanwhile, after they saw the smoke in my hair, my parents had gathered up shovels and buckets and high-tailed it out to the fire. When they had arrived, the wind was blowing and the flames were 6 feet high and climbing. "Oh, Jesus, help us, Jesus! Oh, Jesus, help us, Jesus!" my mother repeated as they fought the flames. Curiously, as if in response, the wind died down, but only long enough for them to put out the fire. Just as the shovel fell for the final time on the fire's last breath, the wind had come right back up again. "It was the power of prayer," my mother said. I can't affirm or deny these details. I'd stuffed myself into a bathroom as far away as I could get from fire and wind and story and meaning. From what I could tell, no fire truck came, no authorities, no sirens. I believe our family laid low for a couple of days afterwards. I heard wisps about a lawsuit. After all, the land that had burned hadn't belonged to us, but to a farmer who lived close by. But as I remember, no one called, no neighbors mentioned it. I heard nothing. My mother cut my hair above my shoulders. I don't remember her doing it, but she must have. The stinking wad of crystallized hair would have been dumped into the garbage along with my hopes of ever becoming the inside girl. She was as real to me as ever, and also 1,000 miles away. She may as well have been in Cuba. She'd left nothing behind but a hole inside me, round like a smoke ring. In general, I've gotten pretty good at maneuvering around it. But every once in a while, I forget it's there, and I get very close to it. When I'm at a party or walking down the street or doing nothing at all, and I can hear her golden laugh, and I am 14 again, freshly shorn and throwing open bathroom doors only to find there are more doors that lead to bathrooms that are even more inside. And I'm trying to get to the one at the center, but the doors never end. I reeked of burnt hair for about a week. It could have been longer than that. It also could have been less. My parents must have decided the trauma of the incident coupled with the loss of my hair had taught me a better lesson than any further punishment they could dole out. I think their relief with the outcome had neutralized any anger they might have felt toward me. We were lucky, they said, that God had spared us some potentially deadly consequences. The fire had been close to a whole row of houses. More than property could have been lost. My mother maintains it was a miracle. Trying to remember anything that happened after the fire feels like trying to look through gauze. Just when I'm sure I've made out a detail clearly, it shifts a little, or else falls out of the picture, and I'm not so sure anymore. Was it God? Was it timing? Humans make meaning out of a collection of facts. I don't think we know where facts end and story begins. It's a hole we can't help but fall into. It wasn't until many years later that I told my parents what I'd been doing with that lighter, and only after my little brother had started his own fire that burned down my parents' backyard. It turned out okay in the end. Another miracle. Of course it was. By the next year, I had gotten my bearings as well as I was going to. A boy I liked asked me to homecoming, my first date. After the dance, we came back to my house to watch a movie, and my mother, who'd gone to bed hours before, had set out snacks, candles, and a note that said, "Please don't let Carrie light the candles. She can't be trusted with fire." So much for the inside girl. And end of story. If you've hung in this long, thank you for listening, dear listener. If this sort of thing is your jam, you can follow me on Substack at Carrie King Presents. carrie.substack.com, where I release a new essay or short story every other week. You can also follow me on the socials, and I'll put links to how you can follow me everywhere in the show notes, which you can find at honestlydearlistener.com. We'll see you in 2 weeks.
Honestly, dear listener.